Oh hey, you caught me at the right time. Here, take these binoculars. You're gonna need them. Now, let's do a little experiment. I want you to watch birds with me. See how relaxing of an experience it can be? Let's look for the right kind of bird first. We have a little bird manual here, so put on your binoculars. Hey, look at that over there. Do you see the bird I'm looking at? Wrong bird. Closer, but still wrong. That's a bird, but not the kind we're looking for. Back on track, but no. Oh yeah, that's what I'm talking about. A lovely mouse. See how relaxing it is to look for a single species of bird amongst all the other wildlife? This leads me into our latest subculture group. Wait, what's that over there?
The story will continue after this.
Birdwatching, otherwise known as birding,
Bird up!
is a subculture that prides itself in the study and documentation of our avian friends, and they're not alone in this pursuit. Birdwatchers are one of the many watcher subcultures. Others include train spotters, plane spotters, amateur astronomers, and celebrity stalkers unofficially called the paparazzi. All but the last of these groups fall under the citizen science subculture, and it's a lovely parent to these haplocultures. Citizen science is the amateur or non-professional research of any field, and while it has multiple definitions, they all converge on the idea of the general public joining in with professional researchers in various fields to help gather and compute knowledge. Chiefly among these fields is nature conservation, and birds are a part of nature. Now, while I don't want to bore you with a bunch of names that I'll probably never bring up again, there's a pretty interesting story behind modern birdwatching. It's a bit of a long one, but I think you'd like it, or you can just skip ahead if you really don't want to hear what I'm squawking about. Birds, like many animals that exist around us, have played a large part in world cultural history. From the Ethiopian holovaka to the Slavic varog, they are portrayed as deities, folklore characters, and even appear on state emblems. They seem to just pop up anywhere that needs something cool that symbolizes power and freedom. Many of the national emblems you see today, like of Poland or the US, are bird-based. They captivate us with their beauty and majesty. It only makes sense why we have them as symbols for a lot of things. They've even made their way into popular culture through movies, songs, and sayings. Phrases like free as a bird and as the crow flies, programs like Sesame Street and their Big Bird, a good chunk of animated shows and films, various aspects of music with songs like Fly Like an Eagle, Free Little Birds, and bands like the Eagles, Birds, Old Crow Medicine Show, all these guys. These are all influenced by the feathered noise machines who live on tree branches. Birds themselves have been used for food, clothing, and companionship for the longest time as well. Many outfits of older times would have feathers as headdresses or inladen with other materials to form beautiful dressings. The military used birds for communication and espionage. There was this one story from the First World War, I think a few of you may know, about a pigeon who... Alright, I'll stop chirping about birds and what they have done for us. While our avian friends seem to have permeated much of past culture, the act of observing them for fun is relatively new for human history. One of the first notable mentions of something similar to birdwatching was mentioned in Shakespeare's The Merry Wives of Windsor. It should be known that this action of birding was more akin to hunting. As we can see here, humanity only had two interactions of birds: hunting them for food or using them aesthetically for fashion or companionship. But soon that will change. Soon the birds will be appreciated, and not just for their musical talent. Reverend Gilbert White, Thomas Bewick, John Clare, and George Montague are considered the first figures of the new birding movement of the early 19th century. All four of these men kept meticulously detailed accounts of the nature around them in their less than urban environments, noting the detail, song, and lives of their avian observees. Birdwatching itself became a more common pastime in the odd and sometimes lovely Victorian era, with clubs and such popping up in cities and villages alike. Around the same time, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds was formed, consisting of women from two separate groups of conservationists who were against the usage of animals in fashion. Think those people who threw blood at someone wearing a fur coat, only more Victorian and less destructive. But it would be a while before their pleas were answered, as hunting birds for something other than fashion was profitable. And everyone, from the lowest scabs working in the mines to some stuffy former attorney who never set foot on a boat and then became the ruler of the Queen's Navy, was involved with one part of birding we don't see much now: taxidermy. At the time, it was the only way to study them well enough. Many taxidermy collections functioned as references for those wanting to study avians. Even people such as Berwick would have stuffed bird corpses nearby to help them better understand the majesty of these creatures. This practice continued up until the late 1800s. After much pressure from newly created conservation groups, people realized that they could enjoy birds without killing them. One can also see the rise of animal conservation groups around this time as well, something that wouldn't explode even more until after the 1960s. But for brevity's sake, here's two groups who like to see birds alive. These groups, both of whom started around the same time across the water from each other, had different origins. In the U.S., there was the Audubon Society, named after early American painter and naturalist John J. Audubon, and spearheaded by ornithologist Alexander Wilson. Started in 1896, the Audubon Society was founded on the principle of not molesting birds. No, but yes, to the modern definition of molest. But it wouldn't be until 1900 that we see something that takes over a large part of the birding community. The bird count. Around Christmas of 1900, the Society launched the Great Christmas Bird Count, a census of winter bird populations that was to counter the Christmas bird hunts that were more popular at the time. Over time, many more birding societies would do the same bird censuses, spurring interest in watching small animals to outside the organizations. Across the pond in the UK, the Royal Society for the Protection of Birds was formed in 1889. Oh hey, we just talked about these gals. Their main aims at the time were the removal of exotic feathers from women's fashion and the end of plume hunting, a practice of hunting birds just for their feathers. This anti-plumage sentiment came out of the corporate marriage of the Plumage League and the Fin, Fur, and Feather Folk. Royally incorporated in 1904 thanks to Edward VII, they would go on later to influence Parliament with the introduction of laws banning plumage on a lot of fashion. And up through the early 20th century, these two associations and countless individuals helped advance the study of birds, especially one British man who I almost forgot to put in the script. Horace Alexander helped forge birdwatching into the hobby it is today. The gifted watcher from a young age, Alexander and his two brothers would spend their free time exploring nature and seeing all that it had to offer. It wouldn't be until he was 20 that he got his first pair of binoculars. But by then he had set up standards with other amateur birders to combine a leisure activity with scientific pursuit. Alexander himself also influenced birdwatching in India, encouraging the pastime among youths like future Prime Minister Indira Gandhi. And you know what? Maybe birdwatching is just a peaceful pastime, something we all could use to escape the world around us, or at least get us through a few world conflicts. During both world wars, birds were used as they would be otherwise, as messengers and food for the pew-pew lads with their love of king and country. Just, not as enthusiastic about watching anything but the enemy lines. However, the darkest of times did help spur many into the hobby of birding. Soldiers everywhere, from the trenches to the med tents, and even as POWs enjoyed the experience of watching little birds that knew nothing about the world around them, aside from the loud noises. And since there really isn't much difference between the domestic implications of birding in both the first and second global conflicts that we know of, we're going to apply this to both to save some time. Between both world wars, there was a growth of civilian birdwatchers. People from all walks of life gathered into forests and meadows to watch wild animals fly and sing. Some of these people were a group of smart-ass teenagers who called themselves the Bronx County Bird Club, home to notable names in ornithology like William Vogt, Joseph Hankey, Alan Cruikshank, and R.T. Peterson. These youngsters would go around the parks, drainage pipes, and dumps looking for birds. And by 1931, they'd taken over 40,000 photos of the little guys. But it wasn't just a bunch of New Yorkers in their Buick going around and loving birds. Egg collecting was popular among school children the world over, and books on birds flew off of shelves as the general populace started to fall in love with this citizen science. But birdwatching was still a niche. Not many could afford to go out on a holiday to the English countryside or American plains. Luckily, that would all change in the next decade. After both world wars, birding would begin to hit its golden age. With the help of environmentalists and ornithologists like Max Nicholson, Tucker, Ferguson Lee, and Marr, would the hobby become more respected and even wider reaching. That's right, with the advent of cheaper binoculars, more means of transportation like cars and airplanes, and even the standardization of birding guides, we would see birdwatching gain more participants than the original rich men and school children that started it all back in the Victorian era. And while the subculture and hobby are still stacked with a lot of the former, it's also gotten more notice from the scientific community. Ornithology is now seen as a respectable field of animal science, a step up from what many would have considered the scientific pursuits of rich weirdos who liked watching tits and stuff from their mansion windows or out in the British fields. And after that, we kind of get to the end of our historical birding expedition. No, wait! Don't change the channel!
There's just a few places in the world where the very name needs birds and birding. Cape May in New Jersey.
Oh hey, it's the turn of millennia. Time to use the internet to find birds. Yep, even with access to millions of pictures of tits and woodpeckers online, birdwatchers still would rather get their binoculars and look out their windows. But I hear you ask, well, if they just sit around and look out their windows, doesn't it get boring seeing the same type of birds every day? And you'd be right. Which is why the birding community the world over has gathered to watch birds in large groups. The British Birdwatching Fair, or Bird Fair as the cool kids call it, is an annual birdwatching festival that has been happening in Rutland for the past 30 years. A step up from traditional bird counts, Bird Fair is more the Glastonbury of birdwatching. Companies set up stands for binoculars, bird tours on foreign shores, and even art of birds. Ooh, pretty. Not to mention that all profits made by Bird Fair go to conservation funds. But the Brits aren't alone in charitable acts of watching animals. and other gatherings exist throughout the world as well. Competitive events like the Big Day, Big Year, and Big Sit. Nowadays, birdwatching is more of a respected leisure pastime. It's even got a few documentaries made in the name of birding. Bill Oddie and Peter Dunn are two prominent figures in modern birding, mostly for their works of various books and television programs. Oddie himself influenced many in the birding community since his foray into BBC natural history shows in the 70s. There are well over 1 million birders in the US alone, and close to the same amount throughout the UK, which makes sense. They gave birth to the subculture, and not surprisingly, it's demographically skewed towards older generations, as most birders are middle-aged, affluent, and from Anglo or Scandinavian nations, which may lead to a problem that can stop birding from spreading its wings. As pointed out in Moss's A Bird in the Bush, there is a loss of potential birders due to the declining interest and lower population growth in the Western world. But individuals in the West are better off financially, which may spur growth in the hobby among retirees in the coming decades. Who knows? We might even see birding take off in developing parts of the world when they get everything sorted out to Western standards. That's the long history bit over with. Maybe I should become a history channel. Never mind, back to the subcultures I go. But these countless history channels do have me thinking, why'd they do that? Well, it's simpler than I thought for putting this in a YouTube video. Most of them do it out of general curiosity or even love of citizen science. And seeing as they both mix together at points, we'll treat it like everyone is here for the science like the nerds they are. Bringing this up yet again, but citizen science is the one key reason people will continue to do things like studying nature. For some, it's a chance to challenge themselves intellectually with their knowledge of birds. For others, it's to learn and teach people about birds. And some just like looking at small animals out of primal instinct. What can be agreed upon with all three of these and many others is because they come about because of that general interest or curiosity with birds. Like this one kid I knew in high school who was big in the rocks for a few years. It goes to show that people who get even slightly down into the details of a subject may immerse themselves in it as a pastime, and almost always does it end up benefiting both themselves and others in the subject community. There's also a more sociological and psychological bit that could play a part, but since I'm not qualified enough to talk about it, I'll briefly cover it. Introduced by naturalist E.O. Wilson in 1984, the hypothesis of biophilia is described as the urge to affiliate with other forms of life. How birding plays into this is that the whole subculture is seen as a subconscious urge, especially in our modern times, to reconnect with nature. So you will have those middle-aged office schlubs go out for a weekend, a month, even a big year and immerse themselves in nature as a way to reconnect to the primal desire to return to monkey. And hey, if birding is biophilia, then it's doing a good job at being an example of humans seeking closer connections with animals. Because as we know, the modern and historical birding subculture has attracted a wide variety of people who view themselves as lovers of this natural science. They include, but are not limited to, the usual bunch. You got politicians, writers, celebrities, and ooh, the late Prince Philip. So could anything be wrong with something that so many people from various walks of life love to do? Not really. Oddly enough, this seems to be one of the few subcultures without much controversy behind them. And while I could go out of my way to go on a tirade about how you shouldn't give old men binoculars and put them on a hill near a girls' dormitory in Essex, the production staff will outright stop me. But since we need to at least show the bad side of birding, well, the subculture is based off of poaching. I don't know if that do something. Oh well. There we go. That'll give some runtime unless we find something more interesting to put after this. And there you have it. That's the whole story on birding, and the not-so-fettered friends who like to use their binoculars to see the avian world. From the age-old existence of birds in human cultures, to schoolboys and poets watching the skies and picking up eggs, even to the soldiers and suffragettes of yesteryear who paved the way for leisure activities such as this. We have a lot to thank birds for, but since we're just here to talk about the subculture of birdwatchers, we'll just thank them for living interesting lives.